Welcome, everybody. We are here and live with another Enablement Uncanned episode. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining the podcast. Appreciate you coming on.
Great to be on here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And Chris, as a way of introduction, Chris Sershon is our acting director. I say acting. We were having a little joke about that offline. Acting director of governance, risk, and compliance here at Bigtincan. And we're going to be going through some slightly different stuff today. So Chris began your career back in 2012 in cybersecurity, working across industrial environments, government contractors, and Fortune 500 vendor risk teams.
Yes.
But you've been in it now for what, a decade, right? And you've seen how vulnerability can really stall an entire deal. And we were just talking about this offline, right? And we're gonna title this episode. We're gonna call this episode "Security, Compliance, and Trust: The Hidden Side of Sales Enablement." So we'll dig into why buyers are now putting security probably at their top, if not in the top three, in their decision criteria, right? And how enablement teams can sort of help prep for those conversations, and what happens when compliance gets left out until it's too late. It's some of the issues. So yeah, let's get stuck in. It'd be great to hear an intro from yourself, Chris, and sort of give us your boldest take on why security and compliance is a hot topic in sales right now.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about sales, most people think about, what kind of return on investment can I get with partnering with a particular piece of software or a particular vendor, but they don't think about, how secure is that vendor. And, over the years, we've seen a lot of upticks in cybersecurity with the attack vector being through a third-party vendor. You can have all the security that in the world that you want in your environment, but the moment you use an unsecure vendor, you're putting yourself at risk. And that has kind of evolved over the last, half a decade to kind of now be this sales focus of trust and protection of is your tool, is your application, is what you're selling me going to be secure and not going to put my company at risk or my customers at risk.
Yeah, it's becoming a huge thing even for me, and it doesn't even cross my mind, right? During the sales process, it doesn't, until it gets to that stage. And we were saying about this, right? It gets to that stage right towards the end. You're kind of a few weeks out from signing paperwork, and then the IT and the security team come wading in. And we need to go through this form and that form and write this out and send all of our information over. It goes way over my head, Chris, like completely way over it. And I'm guessing the rise of AI isn't helping, right? It's people are sort of making up these AI compliance teams and really sort of diving into some of those issues.
Oh, absolutely. And the crazy thing about it is AI is such a novel feature now. There's still not a standard way to protect AI. It's still one of those things that everyone's trying to figure out what the best security practice is. As soon as we started using AI, we immediately had to form our own AI council to start looking into that. And we using help from what our customers were concerned about, also going out there and seeing what, the companies that are developing these security standards, what they're looking at. And it's definitely made compliance and making secure applications a lot difficult, or a lot more difficult, because, it's so novel. And we not only do we know, let me rephrase that, not only do we not know, what the potential security issues are, we don't necessarily know how to actually patch them, for lack of a better term, how to protect ourselves against them.
Yeah, that's you're right, and it's a super tough one, because I guess customers aren't just buying the features these days, or at least that's not what it's coming across. They are confidence that, well, they're buying the confidence that we are actually going to protect their reputation, I guess, in a sense. Particularly with the likes of people that we're selling to, right? I mean, I sell a lot to the healthcare space, med tech, manufacturing. These guys that where they're having to say the right thing all the time, or they're having to ensure if AI is generating them something fancy, it needs to make sure it's saying the right thing, because if it's not, they could get shafted for it, to put it bluntly.
Absolutely. It's not just the security risk of, will this AI result in me having a data breach? A lot of the questions that we're seeing from customers when they ask us about AI and how we're utilizing AI, it's also around what are you doing to make sure that AI isn't biased? It's putting out
Hmm.
good information. We always come back to the garbage in, garbage out analogy, and it's definitely a big factor in what we're seeing in the security space. So now it's not just an aspect of protecting the network or protecting the application, it's also protecting that data as well to make sure that that doesn't change.
Hmm.
And so it's
Yeah, one
definitely
of
like you said, where that it's that uh you're not just buying a feature anymore, you're buying that confidence.
the. It's one of the biggest things I always get. Particularly when they're buying a Genie AI, whatever it may be. Is our data making your system learn, or that's one of the questions. The other one is, does it leave your system? And it's always no, it doesn't leave the system. Everything stays inside. I don't know the reason. I don't. That's the kind of answer I give, but I don't know the ins and outs of it, right? So it becomes a challenge, a real challenge on the sales side.
Oh, absolutely. Most people think that AI is something that is just created. You just create your AI. But what's not noticed is even if you create your own AI in-house, you're still using that learning language model that's been developed by a third party. You're still using that Azure-based AI,
Hmm.
that ChatGPT, OpenAI. You're still using those, and those are still a third-party vendor. And that's where we come back. A lot of it is, we're getting the third-party vendor and fourth-party vendors, and that's why you see that the questions of are you using our data to train your AI? And the concern there isn't just that you're going to potentially create a biased AI. It's that, you're giving all of our very sensitive data over to a third party vendor that we have no control over and we can't verify their security. So now you have to come back and you have to make sure that your security is good of the vendor that you're going with to make sure that the AI security of the vendor that they're using for to build their AI on is also secure. And it can turn into quite the rabbit hole when you start getting into it.
Yeah. I dread to think how many partners that we have that you've got to that you've got to go out and check the security side of it, Chris, because I'm just glad I don't have to do it. Put it that way.
It
Um,
definitely puts the legal and compliance and security teams to work. There's a lot of effort and it's a joint team effort between all those groups to make sure
yeah,
that things are in place to keep us and our customers secure.
it's crazy though, because I think about how busy you guys are. Like, I know you're busy. Every time we ask for a new one coming in or a new load of questions coming in, it has to fill into a queue because you are constantly. And I guess it's only going to get worse and worse with like I said, with the rise of AI. But yeah, give us a bit of background into your journey, because you've been in cybersecurity and compliance for a while now. It'd be good to kind of get a bit of a flavor as to where you started out and sort of how you came through into Bigtincan.
Yeah, absolutely. I started in cybersecurity back in 2012, and I was cutting my teeth at an industrial company that needed cybersecurity to kind of uh, really focus on making sure the batch processing of their financing systems went properly to make sure that if they were billing the government for a contract or something like that, it all happened properly. A lot of hard nights making sure that everything processed right so people got their paychecks. From there,
Hmm.
I ended up working for a variety of other companies, ranging from government contractors to Fortune 500s, doing a lot of risk work, a lot of vendor work. And that's where I got to see, both sides of the coin of what do I need to make my company secure when it comes to my vendors and my security architecture and all of that? But also, what are my customers that I'm selling to looking for? How do they want me to secure those things, and how can I marry both of those things up to make sure I'm both secure, but I'm also marketable. And that's how I ended up where I am today with Bigtincan, and kind of doing that with a SaaS tool, doing sales enablement.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because you've kind of got to get that right balance between being the hardball security reviewer and the actual enabler to ensure that sales teams can talk about it and I guess talk about trust without while sounding truthful, which is actually can be a really difficult thing to master. Been there, right? How many times have you how many times have you seen deals lose, not necessarily at Bigtincan, but in other places, based on a lack of security? Because I imagine that's come up, i.e., people have said no, we're going somewhere else. Does that happen in the industry?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. But back in my days working with Fortune 500s, I watched, as the person doing the risk reviews on the vendor, I watched deals fall through all the time. It's one of those things is you can have three vendors that you're looking at to provide a feature, and they all provide fantastic features, and it becomes a really hard decision to make. So then it becomes, how good is the security?
Hmm.
And you can get all the way up to the day before you sign the contract, and a security team can come back and say, hey, this vendor is going to be a high risk to the company. And that is where you lose that deal, because
Yeah,
management doesn't want to risk a data breach that could cost them 2, 3, 4 million dollars in lost revenue through fines because of partnering with a third party vendor that was maybe only going to help increase their revenue by $1 million.
yeah, it's a no-brainer. You just can't do it, and this is where I mean I see the majority of deals do stall in the IT and the security side of it, right? It happens. So do you think there's a position to move that? And I'm just trying to bring this back into my daily life. Do you think there's a position to move the security and the risk side of it slightly earlier in the deal cycle? If we bring it up sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of ways to do that. First thing, it's always going to come down to enabling your compliance teams and your security
Mm,
teams, making sure that they have the resources they need. Um, when you give them the resources, they can make sure that things, items are in place to make selling that security, selling that trust, um, becomes easier. You start looking at getting compliance certifications, and a lot of people see compliance certifications as just something we have to do to satisfy government needs. I can't handle healthcare data if I'm not compliant with HIPAA. I can't handle financial data if I'm not compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley. But when we come back to what we were talking about earlier, that now becomes a selling point. If I can go to a customer or a prospect and say, hey, I'm already SOC 2 certified, hey, I'm already ISO 27001 certified, then you start to speed up that compliance part of the sales,
mm,
because the customer doesn't have to do as deeper of a dig into you to make sure that you're doing what you're saying you're doing, because you've already gone out and got a third party auditing party group to come in and say, hey, we checked them over for you. They're doing everything they said that they're doing. You don't have to do that
mm,
deep dive. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing that you can do to kind of enable your sales teams and your compliance teams is cross training. It's huge. One of the things I've seen a lot is, marketing and sales won't necessarily, they have their view of what they are selling, but that doesn't always match up to the technical layout of the security architecture on the back end. And making sure that you're sitting both those groups down, the security and compliance that can see that technical back end with the sales and marketing team, and get a one-to-one of, like, when I say I am selling this to the customer, it relates to these systems that already have these certifications. Then you're not having to run around going, okay, is this system certified? Does this system have this in place? You already know it because you've already mapped your product to the technical side of it.
yeah, yeah. Because you're right, and you could probably, and I'm not putting this on Bigtincan sales folk, I'm not going to do that, but you could probably speak to 90%, maybe even higher salespeople, particularly across Europe, and all of them wouldn't be able to talk to this fluently, right? Um, I know I couldn't. I wouldn't be able to do it. And when these questions do arrive at the stage that salespeople start to get impatient at that sort of stage, where you're trying to get the deal closed, if they're not prepped with the right info, like you said, garbage in, garbage out kills the deal, right?
Absolutely.
And you don't want to sound fluffy at that point, because if you sound fluffy and you don't know what you're talking about, that trust diminishes. So I guess it's yeah, like I said, the importance of including it at an earlier start. But I guess what you would have to do is get in front of the right people early, but customers are kind of reluctant to do that before they've built the value around the actual product itself, because it's a completely different team. The GRC teams wouldn't necessarily get involved until later on. So I don't know how we would. What do you reckon we should do in terms of trying to get into them early? Is there any suggestions?
Well, going back to what I was saying with cross training, that's a huge factor in this, right?
Mm,
You can have an RFI team, and we do. We have a member of our GRC team that's almost all they do. Their whole responsibility.
yeah.
We would like them to be doing more than just RFIs, but that's their main focus, is answering those questions and getting those security and compliance questions answered for your sales team. If you do that sales training earlier, or you get that cross training done between the two teams, you can then come out and have your salespeople already knowing those correct answers, and it even comes down to, you can get marketing involved, right? We're all one big team, right? And so, you get that answer from the compliance person, you sit down with marketing, figure out how to make that really boring technical jargon into a marketing uh, a
Nice, colorful
marketing
document.
statement. And
Yeah,
then all your salespeople have to do is turn around and give that marketing statement back out, and then you have
yeah, yeah.
legal look it over to make sure that it's not saying anything that we don't want to say, or saying anything that's incorrect. When we all work together as one big team, rather than just a sales team and a marketing team and a compliance
Hmm.
team, it ends up making that security and compliance and trust more marketable, and further enables the sales team to be able to get it in early and sound confident when they're going to sell that trust. That way they're not fumbling over, oh, well, I have to go and ask my compliance people to answer that question. They can give an initial, this is what we know we have in place. If you would like more information, I can get more details of how we have this in place.
I need to be better. I need to be better at this, and I think a lot of people would admit that. And I'm happy to the first person. I'm happy to admit where I need to improve. Um, because I joke about it on calls, I joke about it in front of customers, and I shouldn't, because it can kind of, I just say, hey, any technical questions, I'll pass you off. Um, but being able to speak to it in a very simple term will see us a long, long way. Do you think there's any particular reason why it's becoming such a factor in sales? I know we kind of talked about the data breaches through the vendors and stuff, but why is it becoming such a factor now? I guess more than ever, because it really is increasing, isn't it?
Well, over the last decade, we've seen an uptick in those attacks through third-party vendors. We were talking about that earlier. You can have the best security in the world at your company, but the moment you partner with a third-party vendor who's not secure, or is saying they're doing something that they're not, that's when you're opening up a vector for attack. In 2025, we've had at least 3 separate incidences already with major companies like TransUnion and Alliance Life, where they were data breached, not because their security was bad, but because the security with one of their vendors was bad. And that vendor that was getting all this sensitive data was able to access it with their vendor and then release it out. We also had one recently with SalesLoft that we saw, where SalesLoft itself, who is a huge vendor, the huge sales enablement
Oh, we
tool,
use them. Yeah,
exactly, almost everyone uses them.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and they were data breached, and they had to go out and tell everyone, hey, we got data breached, check your data and make sure that you're not using these tools or these settings because your data may have been compromised. And that's kind of why we're starting to see this uptick of why compliance and security is such a selling point, because the last thing you want to do is partner with an application or partner with a vendor that isn't secure and put yourself at risk.
Yeah, I see it all the time. I even get emails, and the worst thing about it, Chris, if I get an email from somebody saying check your data or something's been leaked, because I see a lot of them all the time, and some of them are phishing, some of them are rubbish, right? Um, the worst thing about it is I tend to ignore them because I guess I just don't know the importance of what's happening, and it might just be personal data. I don't know, but we see them all the time. I'm not saying with Bigtincan, I'm talking on the personal side of it. So I guess that's just a lack of education, a lack of understanding from myself as to how important something like this is. I don't know.
Absolutely. In general, with the growth of access to information through the internet and Web 2.0 and now AI, we're seeing more and more risk out there, not just professionally, but personally. And as a result, we've seen a lot more concern to personal privacy and
Mm.
corporate, protecting ourselves from corporate espionage and things like that. And so as we in general have started to become more security aware in our personal lives, we're taking that back to our jobs and going, hey, if I'm worrying about this in my day-to-day life, our customers are going to be worrying about that in their day-to-day lives, and they're going to be worrying about that in their professional lives too. And this all tracks back to why it's so important to view security and compliance and the trust that a good security and compliance setup can bring as a marketing aspect, because we are more security aware these days.
Hmm. Yeah, always have been. So linking this to, because there's a lot of enablement folk that listen to these calls, and sales folk that listen to, not these calls, these podcasts, I should say. What would you do to suggest? Because here I've definitely learned a lot more than I would have anywhere else, for sure. But what would you suggest to enablers listening, how they can start weaving in this technical information in? Would you put them in front of a PC and just say, hey, let's listen to Chris for an hour and talk about HIPAA and SOC 2, and salespeople, in my experience, would probably switch off to that. You know what it's like. They're like,
Yep.
okay, I don't care. How do we instill that in the sales process? How do we get salespeople to actually love security?
Well, sticking them in front of a computer and just saying, listen to me for an hour is definitely not the way to do it. Anyone who's ever done their annual security compliance training knows about halfway through that, you start the tune out and you're waiting, okay, when can I click next? Let's just get this over and done with. So no, the best way to do it is really empower your security team, empower your compliance team, and then encourage your sales and marketing team to have those conversations with the security and compliance teams. I mentioned cross training over and over, and that really
Yeah, yeah.
is the key to it. Finding someone on your security and compliance team that is sales minded and sees that this is a marketing aspect and kind of might have that sales savvy. And even if they don't have that sales savvy, cross train them, teach them how to be sales savvy. On the flip side, you take those salespeople and you find one that, or find some that are very security minded, and start to explain more of the technical aspect. When you have that happen, when you have those two teams start working together, you start to see an increase in sales enablement, because your salespeople can speak more confidently. But then if you have to call in a GRC person or a security person to answer those calls, they're able to do it as if they were working for sales themselves, rather than a gremlin sitting in a closet, looking at security scans all day. And I'm speaking from personal experience on that one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, um, was not the greatest speaker myself when it came to getting in front of customers early on in my career, and it's something that I had to hone over the years. So that's one of those critical things. Another thing is making sure, what does it mean to be ISO 27001 certified? What does it mean to be HIPAA certified? Look at the compliance that is for your industry and what your other customers may be looking at in your industry, and start working towards possibly getting that certification to make yourself more marketable. Um, and see, I think I hit everything, all the points I wanted
You
to.
did. Yeah, you've hit, and this is it, right? It's kind of making it bite size. It's kind of making it fun. Can we make security fun? And I guess we can, right? And I wouldn't even mind getting someone like yourself on calls with customers early doors, but particularly if they feel like they need it. We don't do enough of that. And I think we could instill that. I guess it depends on times, whether you have the capacity to do it, and it's not necessarily a customer facing role per se. But um, we need to, like you said, train sellers to position it as part of the whole value prop, as opposed to it just being a hurdle. Um, and not bore people with overly technical sessions, because they will just click through. Um,
Absolutely.
is there you've hit the nail on the head, like you said, you've kind of shared everything you wanted to share. Is there any resources or any more advice or anything that you would want to share with the listeners, knowing the kind of people that do listen to this?
Sure. Look at your company structure. If you have a CISO, if you have an ISO, even if you don't have either of those and you're a small company and all you have is one person with a CISSP certification or a similar certification, start talking to them. Get involved with them, see what they're doing, ask them questions and encourage them to ask you questions. Come in and, like we talked before, marry up the technical side of the environment of what you're creating and what you're selling and the protections that are there, and how does that map to the products that you're selling. It really comes down to having those hard conversations within your team and trying to grow both teams out, making your security and compliance teams more security or more sales conscious, and making your sales and marketing teams more security conscious, and marrying those two up. But it all starts out with, you already probably have security resources within your company that you can reach
Yeah.
out to and start asking those questions, and they will be happy to tell you, because almost all security everywhere is trying to sell themselves to say, hey, I need more resources so I can make you more marketable.
Yeah, you're right. You gotta get the teams working together. I guess dumb it down for the salespeople to ensure that they know what they're talking about, but it's giving reps credibility as well, and I think that's one of the most important things. And I've always been a big believer in objection handling, and having to close those doors early enough before you get to the closing of the deal. And security and compliance is technically, it's always one of them blockers. In 95% of opportunities, it is a blocker. So if you can close that down as early as possible, then absolutely, let's make sure we do that. And talking of marketing teams, they will put your name in lights, Chris. They're a good bunch of folk here at Bigtincan, so they'll put your name up here on the screen, um, showing that you're part of this. But yeah, no, really appreciate you coming on this, and I think it's a slightly different look and feel to our usual topics, but it's a really important one that people tend to look over. So yeah, thank you so much. Do
Oh,
appreciate
it
it.
was fantastic to be here and talk about this, and hopefully I wasn't too boring with it.
Definitely not boring, but make sure you connect with Chris on LinkedIn and listen to Chris. Engage your own security and compliance teams and help your sales teams out by doing so, because enabling your sellers that trust is part of every conversation, not just an afterthought. So yeah, thank you, Chris, again. Appreciate it. And this has been Enablement Uncanned. Thanks, everyone.